Time now, 7 minutes past 11. You would have heard about this. It was described as the biggest treatment disaster in NHS history at a public inquiry in 2019. Up to 30,000 people with haemophilia and other bleeding disorders were given blood infected with HIV and hepatitis viruses during the 70s and 80s. Thousands of those have died. Today, the government has confirmed that thousands of victims will receive interim compensation payments of £100,000 each. Families have welcomed the news, but say that there are many people like bereaved parents who will miss out. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Kit Malthouse, has stressed that the inquiry is ongoing.
So what the inquiry said to us was that we should make swift payments to those who are infected and to bereaved partners because they're already registered to a support scheme. And that allows us to make the payments quickly. Wider eligibility is more complicated, and while that will be considered as part of the inquiry, and that inquiry will conclude next year, that we weren't able to make payments quickly to those people for the reasons of complexity now.
Now, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, a former Labour Health Secretary who's campaigned on this issue, says this is just the first step when it comes to getting justice.
People say, oh, it's sad to see somebody playing when they're not at their best anymore. But I don't see what that's got to do with all of those of us who are the viewers. I think it's the player themselves who needs to be comfortable with it because they've got a lot of life left to live.
Let's talk to our health correspondent, Nick Triggle, who's been all over this. Nick, morning to you.
Morning.
Morning. OK, so I briefly touched upon the background. Just expand on that for me, would you please?
Well, as you say, it's been called the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. So during the 1970s, thousands of NHS patients with haemophilia and other blood disorders were given blood products. But these blood products, clotting treatments, were contaminated because the medication was imported from the US and it was made from the pooled blood plasma of thousands of paid donors. Now, amongst those donors were some high-risk donors, prisoners, for example. And if a single donor was infected with a blood-borne virus, such as hepatitis or HIV, then the whole batch of medication could be contaminated. So thousands, really an unknown number of patients have been exposed to hepatitis or HIV, including people who receive blood transfusions, maybe women after childbirth or patients undergoing hospital surgeries in the 70s and early 80s. And we know at least 2,400 people have died relating to this and many thousands affected.
This inquiry is ongoing, Nick, so this payment is an interim payment.
Yes, it is. And it came about because in July, Sir Brian Langstaff, the chair of the public inquiry, said there was a compelling case to pay compensation quickly because many of these victims, their health is failing. And he said they were on borrowed time. I mean, it really comes after decades of campaigning. The victims have got some financial support in recent years, but this is the first time compensation has been paid, recognising the loss of earnings, the increased care costs and other lifetime losses these people have experienced. Now, because of the complexity, and the Minister hinted at this, it's going to be paid to, this compensation is going to be paid to around 4,000 people in the UK. And those are the people who are already registered for that existing financial support scheme. But there are many more people, children who have lost parents, people who have lost their husbands and wives, who will have to wait much longer, probably until the end of the public inquiry in 2023, before they get compensation.
And interim now, do we have any idea of how much the total amount being set aside for this will be, or how much families can expect in the longer term?
That's not yet clear. I mean, there's only estimates for how many people are affected. It could run into tens of thousands of people getting compensation, which could run into to billions of pounds of compensation potentially. Much will depend on the work of the public inquiry over the next year.
OK, Nick, thanks very much for that. That's our health correspondent, Nick Triggle. I want to bring in Michellle Tolley from Norfolk, who's been living under the shadow of this for the past 35 years. She's 57 years old. She's a mum of 4. Her blood was contaminated with hepatitis C after she received a blood transfusion in 1987 after she'd given birth. Then she was 22 years old. Michellle, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Morning. I know you have become, because of what's happened to you, a great advocate for supporting families who have been through this, as well as your own experiences. I'd like to start with you, though. So 22 years old, you had a blood transfusion because you'd just given birth and were in trouble?
Yeah, that's right. I had a postpartum hemorrhage and needed 4 pints of blood to be transfused. And in one of those bags of blood was hepatitis C. I just want to kind of clear something up here, because for transfusion victims, we don't have the blood products such as factor 8 or factor 9 that are pulled together. So that's the clotting factor for those guys with the bleeding disorders such as Hemophilia and von Willebrand's. But for us guys, it's just, the whole pint of blood each time. Our blood, I'm led to believe, did not come from America, but was gathered from in the UK, Scotland, etc., from those sources. There's a lot of us infected by this method, and we're still being diagnosed as of today. There's thousands out there of people infected like myself who don't know. We need to find those people. It could be somebody that you know, my lovely, somebody in your family, somebody in your producer's family. It is critical that we get them tested, get them treated, and we get them cured.
And just to make clear, if people want to get in touch, you run a group called Contaminated Whole Blood UK, yeah? And they can get in touch with you that way.
They can get in touch with me, yeah, that's a Facebook group. The Hepatitis C Trust, easily found on Google, and also the Infected Blood Inquiry is still running at the moment. I'm happy for anyone to contact me on Facebook, not a problem.
Great. To get back to you personally, your story, once you were infected with that blood, when did you find out?
So I didn't find out until the end of November 2015. I was infected in September 1987.
How did you find out?
By chance. I have to say I was turned away by a GP surgery in the mid-90s when something had come on the television stating that the bloods hadn't been screened. I knew that I'd had 2 blood transfusions. I sought advice from a phone number because there was no internet back then. Went along to my GP, told him how exhausted that I'd been and that I'd had 2 blood transfusions before the bloods were screened. And his attitude was, well, you've got 4 young children, what do you expect? And almost shooed me out the door of his hand with the attitude of, don't be silly, you won't have that, and never tested me. So, yeah, I'm very angry at that opportunity there was missed. So, yes, I had hepatitis C for 29 years before I was treated, 28 years before I found out. Very big shock to me, big shock to everybody that finds out. I know we talk about these interim payments of 100k. So those people, like myself, that were infected, and for the widows and widowers, and there are people that have been missed out this time round, but it's not only the bereaved parents or the bereaved children, there's also the people who cannot get their missing records, and there's also those that were infected post-1991. There are a cohort of people in that window who were infected, but they are not acknowledged by the government schemes.
Can I again return to you? What made you think that, physically what was happening to you over that period of time to make you think that you might have been infected?
Right, okay, so I was severe fatigue. I think that's the constant thing for me. And as time progressed on, I then became diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Again, another missed opportunity. Liver levels had shot up, but there was sugar in the blood, so that was it. It was another missed opportunity. My surgery at the time didn't do the look-back exercise, which you may or may not have heard of.
I don't know what that is, no.
Okay, so yeah, the government did this look-back exercise, 95, 96, but surgeries weren't forced to do it. And again, that surgery that I went to with that GP who I'd appealed to, they chose not to do the look-back. So Yeah,
But physically, you were exhausted.
Oh, I was, and
You
so I'd come
diabetes.
up to diabetes, yeah. So I'd come up to my, I was diagnosed when I was 50, but the real end part of it, I had really itchy skin. I was getting really bad kind of spots and that on my legs. I was having these like severe fevers, like I was always getting flu. The tiredness is just unbelievable, and brain fog. I actually thought I was in the early stages of dementia, where I just couldn't think, I couldn't remember anything. It was really awful. But as I was only 50 years old, I thought I was going through my change.
Like the menopause.
Yeah, yes, of course, menopause. And then I'd had a yearly diabetic check with my new surgery in Norfolk, and I'd called in by my GP because my levels were all over the place, and he was saying to me, he had to ask me, had I been a drug user, which I have never have, and was an alcoholic, which no, I wasn't. And although he asked me very nicely, I didn't feel, I didn't feel awful by what he said. He apologised that he had to ask me. And then it was like a light bulb moment that went off in my head like a cartoon, and I said to him, oh, God, I had 2 blood transfusions before the blood was screened, and I was turned away by a previous GP. And I can remember he put his hand in his head in his hands even, and I was tested, and then he phoned me at home and said, I'm really sorry to say, but you're positive for hepatitis C. And my whole world at that moment in time crushed. It was devastating. I cannot begin to tell you the impact of me, and I'm like a bubbly kind of jovial person, but I became very withdrawn. I didn't even want to speak to my own children. They were grown up, now got grandchildren. I didn't want to speak to my husband. I then felt dirty. At one point, I can remember being in the bathroom scrubbing, thinking, oh my God, I've got this horrible killer virus in my system. And then I got angry. And I think I began campaigning because I thought, God, if that's happened to me, how many more me's might be out there? And that's when I started to speak out to try, and I thought if I can at least reach one person and get them treated and cured, maybe I could make a bit of peace with myself that I've had this awful thing inflicted, this death sentence.
Because you've also had your gallbladder out, I believe. I have cirrhosis.
I've got cirrhosis of the liver, I've got a kidney disease, I've got acid reflux, I've got diverticulitis, my hair doesn't grow properly. Yours is a lovely style, it suits you massively, but mine is the same style, and that's not through choice, it just hasn't grown back properly.
That's kind of you to say.
It does, it suits you. But yeah, this whole impact now, and like I say, there's still people out there. There's still people out there infected.
You're absolutely right. Michellle, stay with me. I've got Rosemary Calder, who's from Northamptonshire. Do you know Rosemary?
I do, I know. Hello, Rosemary.
Hello, Michellle.
Oh darling. Oh.
Well, let me tell our listeners about Rosemary. Hi, Rosemary.
Hello.
Your son, Nicholas, died in 1999. He was 25 years old, and he'd been infected with HIV and hepatitis C. Now, Rosemary, firstly, I'm so sorry for the loss of your son. One of the reasons we're talking about this today is because of this announcement about the interim compensation. Now, you're someone who isn't eligible for that. Why is that? Have you been told?
Bereaved parents are not eligible. I would like to first of all say that on behalf of all the bereaved parents, I think I speak for the majority of them, that we welcome the government going some way towards acknowledging what's been so badly done to the infected community. But my heart aches for parents and children who have never ever received any acknowledgement for their losses and for their pain and their suffering. And parents actually feel that the children's lives have just been cast aside, that they haven't mattered.
I'm so sorry you feel that way. What happened to Nicholas?
Well, Nicky was a haemophiliac, severe haemophiliac. When he was 11, I received a letter from his consultant at the hospital to tell me that he had tested positive for HIV. I was fortunate, I suppose, in as much as I had him for another 14 years. Many parents weren't that fortunate. Many parents lost their children when they were very young.
What was the impact on his short life? I mean, he died at 25 and you said it was 14 years he had it. He was infected. So he was a child.
He was a child. He would have been...
What was it like living with HIV at that time?
Well, Nicky would have been 8 or 9 when he was infected by his treatment. And we were informed when he was 11. Amidst all the hysteria that was going on at the time, we in fact never told Nicky until he was 14, because I didn't see how an 11-year-old could actually cope with that knowledge.
Yes.
With all the stigma. He did come home from school one day and say that somebody had called him an AIDS boy, because people automatically put haemophilia with AIDS. When he was 14, we told him, and to be honest, he coped with it very well. He just made a decision that he would get on with his life as best as he possibly could. As the years went by, he did get married, and he had a child who was 13 months old when his dad died. So his son never knew his father at all.
What's the impact it has had on your family?
It's massive. It's been a massive impact. It led to the breakup of our marriage. My older son still suffers from survivor's guilt, and my daughter just still can't talk about the situation without bursting into tears. And it's something that we will never, ever, never recover from as a family, regardless of however much compensation they may eventually pay. But, you know, for parents, it's not about money. It's about justice and acknowledgement of our children and recognition that of their lives mattered, that they were people that mattered, and they were loved, and they're very, very much missed.
I have no idea of how you live with the pain you live with every day, especially, and it's not just the loss of Nicky, as you call him, but what you witness, the impact of it is on your family, on the other members of your family. Is compensation the only way the government can show contrition, I suppose, for you?
Compensation is a way of them showing contrition, but we want acknowledgement of the wrongdoing. We want people held accountable, and we need a very sincere apology. Compensation, there's no amount of compensation, no amount of money that can compensate the parents for the loss of their children. And in many cases, it's not just one child, it's 2 children. How a parent copes with that, I've no idea. I find it difficult enough to cope with losing one child, but to lose 2 in the same circumstances, I don't know how they ever get through their lives.
The group you run, this support group for bereaved parents.
Yes.
I mean, you've lived with this for decades. Time, and please don't take this the wrong way, time is moving on, as you are well aware.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're all knocking on a bit, I reckon. And, you know, probably age isn't on the side of a lot of the parents. Some of the parents are quite elderly, and some of them, many of them, I think, feel that they will never get to see justice for their children because all the time they are put to the bottom of the pile. Now, don't get me wrong, it's really important that the infected are looked after.
Mm-hmm.
But the situation with parents and with children who have lost their parents needs addressing sooner rather than later if anybody is to be held accountable. and any parent is to get some kind of peace.
Rosemary and Michellle, I'm going to read a statement from Boris Johnson, and I'd like your reactions. The outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said, "While nothing can make up for the pain and suffering endured by those affected by this tragic injustice, we are taking action to do right by victims and those who have tragically lost their partners by making sure they receive these interim payments as quickly as possible. We will continue to stand by all those impacted by this horrific tragedy, and I want to personally pay tribute to all those who have so determinedly fought for justice." Rosemary.
Well, we will continue fighting for justice for our children until we get it.
Do you get any words of comfort from that statement?
No, none at all.
Michellle.
No, me neither. I totally agree with you, Rosemary. Life is priceless. You can't put a price on a person's life. You absolutely can't. Rosemary, you are just amazing. I love you so much. I'm getting upset now thinking about your Nicky. But God bless you, darling.
I mean, the support you all show each other, it must be, that in itself is priceless, isn't it, Rosemary?
It is. This is if you can ever say there's a good thing to come out of a tragedy like this, it's the support you get from the others who are infected and affected. And that is something that's priceless as well.
Rosemary Calder, mother of Nicholas, Nicky, who died in 1999, who was infected with HIV and hepatitis C. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the work you're doing for the other families you're supporting. And thank you for talking to me. Michellle Tolley, who has been infected after blood transfusion, after giving birth many, many years ago, who is still suffering the consequences of that physically, emotionally and mentally, and also runs a support group. Michellle, can you just tell me if someone does fear that they may be part of this group, just tell me how they can get in touch with the group you're involved in?
Yeah, so it's a Facebook group called Contaminated Whole Blood UK. They can also reach out to the Hepatitis C Trust and also the Infected Blood Inquiry.
Michellle, thank you very much, and Rosemary, thank you very much, and I wish you both well.
Families have welcomed the government's decision to pay thousands of victims of the infected blood scandal interim compensation of £100,000 each. It will be given to those whose health is failing after developing blood-borne viruses, such as hepatitis and HIV, as well as the partners of people who have died. But there are concerns many people, such as bereaved families, will miss out. Jason Evans' father, Jonathan, died after receiving infected blood.
It's good that surviving victims and bereaved partners will get this payment, but the majority will not. And there seems to be no rational basis for it, really. You know, big step forward for some, but for the majority, another day of upset.